Hello and welcome to Indus News. Live from Islamabad, I'm Naila Shujra and these are the headlines. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has criticized the Western media for highlighting the Uyghur situation but neglecting human rights violations in occupied Kashmir. He was speaking to Chinese journalists as Beijing marks the century of the ruling Communist Party. The Prime Minister reiterated that ties between Pakistan and China will not be affected by any sort of pressure. Pakistan has called on the international community to take note of the plight of oppressed children in Indian-occupied Kashmir. In a statement, the Foreign Office welcomed a UN report highlighting the targeting of civilians with pellet guns. Islamabad strongly condemned the denial of right to self-determination of Kashmiris. Germany says there is no alternative to the two-state solution for the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier said this after meeting with his Israeli counterpart Reuven Rivlin in Jerusalem. Russia has reported a record 672 coronavirus deaths for a third day in a row. Meanwhile, World Health Organization says COVID cases in Europe has again increased after 10 weeks of decline. In Pakistan, the virus has claimed 40 more lives and infected over 1,000 people in the past 24 hours. Globally, there are 3.9 million deaths and more than 182 million cases. For more news and details, stay tuned. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has criticized the Western media for highlighting the Uyghur situation, but neglecting human rights violations in occupied Kashmir. He was speaking to Chinese journalists as Beijing marks the century of the ruling Communist Party. The Prime Minister said Islamabad accepts Beijing's aversion regarding the treatment of Uyghur Muslims in China's Xinjiang province. Highlighting Pakistan's strong ties with China, he said Beijing has always stood by Islamabad in difficult times. Khan said Islamabad's ties with Beijing will not change despite any amount of pressure. He added that India will reap far greater benefits by engaging in trade with China rather than trying to act as a counterbalance. On Afghanistan, Khan said Pakistan is worried about the possibility of a civil war after the withdrawal of foreign troops. Pakistan has called on the international community to take note of the plight of oppressed children in Indian-occupied Kashmir. In a statement, a Foreign Office spokesperson welcomed a UN report highlighting the targeting of civilians with pellet guns. Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said the only viable option is the solution of the Kashmir dispute as per the UN Security Council resolutions. He said any steps that are aimed at bringing further change in the occupied valley will not be accepted by locals. Pakistan has repeatedly condemned the denial of the right to self-determination of Kashmiris. Pakistan and India have exchanged a list of prisoners under a 2008 agreement on consular access. A list of 609 Indian prisoners were handed over to the Indian High Commissioner in Islamabad, out of which 558 are fishermen. Simultaneously, Indian authorities shared the list of 345 Pakistani prisoners. Under the bilateral pact, the two sides are required to exchange lists of prisoners in January and July. The Afghan government says its troops have thwarted a massive Taliban attack aimed at capturing the Ghorian district in Herat. The provincial governor said the Taliban gathered from different parts of the western province to attack the district. He said 20 fighters were killed during the clashes. The governor added security forces also neutralized a suicide car bomber before reaching the target. Afghan forces also claimed to have retaken control of Shinbari district in Parvan. Meanwhile, the Taliban say they have captured an Afghan military base in Sayedabad district of Maidan. Russia says some parties to the Iran nuclear talks need more time before resuming negotiations in Vienna. Russia's UN envoy Mikhail Yulinov said a new round is unlikely before next week. Earlier, Iran's UN envoy said the United States must guarantee that it will not unilaterally leave the deal again. The high-level talks are underway in Vienna to revive the deal from which Washington pulled out in 2018. The Arab coalition has destroyed an explosive Laden drone launched by Yemen's Houthi rebels towards southern Saudi Arabia. In a statement, the coalition said Houthis have systematically targeted civilian properties. Earlier, Yemen's army said that it shot down 2 Houthi drones over the Marib city. Houthis have intensified their attacks on the oil-rich province of Marib since February. Germany says there is no alternative to the two-state solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier said this during a meeting with his Israeli counterpart Reuven Rivlin in Jerusalem. Steinmeier said that Iran must be prevented from acquiring nuclear weapons. The German presidency said Steinmeier will hold talks with the new Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. He said he will also meet alternate Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid. In Canada, remains of 182 more Indigenous children have been found at a former boarding school in British Columbia. This is the third such discovery in Canada in recent weeks. An Indigenous group said the Lower Kootenay Band says that the children were aged between 7 and 15. The group said it is believed that the remains belong to bands of the Kunsat Nation and other First Nation people. The Lower Kootenay Band says that it too early decided if these were the former students of the school. Indigenous leaders say they believe that more graves will be found as investigations into the sites of these schools continue. In Canada, nearly 500 people have died due to record-breaking heat over the last 5 days in British Columbia. The state's chief coroner, Lisa Laponte, says that the death toll will rise. British Columbia's Lytton town broke Canada's hottest temperature records 3 times this week, hitting 49.6 degrees Celsius. Meanwhile, in northwest U.S., temperatures in Washington and Oregon soared well above 38 degrees Celsius over the weekend. Oregon reported 63 deaths linked to the heat wave. Its governor, Kate Brown, has also declared a state of emergency due to the imminent threat of wildfires. In Haiti, at least 15 people have been killed in a shootout at the capital, Port-au-Prince. The national police chief says a journalist and a police activist were those among killed. He accused allies of Phantom 509, a group of rebel police officers, for the shootout, but did not provide any evidence. The chief said that the shootings occurred just hours after a group member was slain in that same area. He said that the police cannot tolerate these acts of reprisal in any form. Officials say the incident is still under investigation. Meanwhile, the United States has condemned the violence and urged Haiti to counter and increase the gang violence. In Nigeria, unidentified gunmen have killed a Zamfara state lawmaker in a rural area. Officials said Ahmed was driving from the state capital, Gusau, to the city of Kano. Meanwhile, a state governor's convoy also came under fire in a separate incident that left 3 police officers injured. The situation in northwestern Nigeria has worsened, with hundreds of children abducted from schools this year for ransom. Brazil has registered over 2,000 coronavirus-related deaths and more than 43,000 cases overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.9 million lives and infected over 182 million people. More in this report.
Experts warn that the highly transmissible Delta variant is threatening progress made by the U.S. in fighting COVID-19. President Joe Biden has come up well short in his goal of delivering 80 million doses to the rest of the world by the end of June. Meanwhile, the Pan American Health Organization warns that the end of the pandemic is distant in most of Latin America and the Caribbean. In Brazil, far-right President Jair Bolsonaro said the Senate Commission investigating his conduct during the pandemic cannot touch him. But hundreds of Brazilians took to the streets to call for Bolsonaro's impeachment over what they call his genocidal pandemic policies.
That's
$1 that Bolsonaro and the Ministry of Health wanted to earn on each vaccine bought, on the life of every Brazilian. We have more than 500,000 COVID-19 deaths in our country, and it is the result of the genocidal policy which revitalized the strength of coronavirus in our country.
Over in Asia, Thailand is reopening the holiday hotspot of Phuket to tourists quarantine-free, even as the country registered its highest daily death toll from COVID-19. Meanwhile, the Indonesian president has announced tougher social restrictions from July 3rd to 20th to stem a worrying spike. In Australia, significant numbers of new cases are being detected in New South Wales. The rising toll has raised fears of fresh clusters as the state reported a rise in new infections for a third straight day.
Yesterday at 8 p.m, New South Wales had 24 cases of local community transmission. Half of those were cases that were exposed in the community. A number of those cases were people who were conducting work in the last few days, some with symptoms, and we can't continue to have that happen.
The World Bank says it will up funding for COVID-19 vaccine purchases and deployment to $20 billion. South Korea has also unveiled a supplementary budget of over $29 billion to offer pandemic relief to households, aid small businesses, and create jobs.
In Pakistan, 40 more people have lost their lives to COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the death toll has crossed 22,000. The ministry said more than 1,000 people tested positive for the virus overnight. It said the caseload has exceeded 958,000, while over 904,000 have recovered. There are nearly 32,000 active cases in the country, out of which over 1,800 are critical. Meanwhile, nearly 160 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine have been administered. Health Ministry data shows that more than 3 million people have been fully vaccinated. It's now time for a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. North Korea has vowed to boost relations with China. Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un says he wishes to take bilateral ties to a new strategic point. Kim sent a message to China's President Xi Jinping on the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. He said that strengthening ties is a need of the hour and desired by the people of both states. Kim said the pressure of hostile forces on the CPC is ineffective and can never undo China's progress. China's President Xi Jinping has warned against anyone trying to oppress or bully his country. Xi was addressing a ceremony to mark 100 years of the Chinese Communist Party. Celebrations at Tiananmen Square saw massive crowds with military jets fly past, cannon salutes, and patriotic songs. The Chinese president said Beijing has never oppressed another country, nor will it do so ever. It pledged to complete the reunification with Taiwan and to smash any attempts at formal independence for the island. Xi highlighted the role of the party in modern China and its central role in the country's growth.
100 年前 100 years ago, the pioneers of communism in China established the Communist Party of China and developed the great founding spirit of the party, which is comprised of the following principles: upholding truth and ideals, staying true to our original aspiration, take on the historical mission, fighting bravely without fear of sacrifice, and remaining loyal to the party and faithful to the people. This spirit is the party's source of strength.
Hong Kong is also marking its handover anniversary today. Now moving on, the Russian Navy has carried out live firing exercises in the Black Sea. The move comes amid ongoing Sea Breeze 21 exercises in the sea led by Ukraine, the United States, and NATO. In a statement, the Russian Navy said the crews of 2 large landing ships had fired at sea and air targets. Meanwhile, the Russian Defense Ministry said it is tracking an Italian Navy frigate that entered the Black Sea. The drill came 2 days after Russia tested its air defense systems in Crimea. Moscow had also called for the exercise to be canceled and said that it will react to safeguard national security if necessary. In Ethiopia, rebels claim to have forced the government troops to leave Tigray's capital, Mekelle. Earlier, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said troops left the city because it was no longer the center of gravity for conflict. A spokesperson for the Tigray's People Liberation Front termed Ahmed's comment a lie. It said that the TPLF fighters bested security forces in what they called their own game. The spokesperson also said government-allied Eritrean troops have not withdrawn from the region. Earlier, a government official said the troops could return to Mekelle in weeks if needed. He also said Eritrean forces, which have been accused of abuses against civilians, had withdrawn from the region. Turkey says it is talking to Russia on the extension of a cross-border aid operation into war-torn Syria. Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu says the mandate must be extended beyond the 10th of July when it expires. Cavusoglu and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov held a press conference in Antalya. Turkish Prime Minister said Ankara will continue to work with Moscow on a political solution to the Syrian crisis. He added that the two sides will also coordinate on the maintenance and the existing ceasefire in the north. For his part, Lavrov criticized the Caesar-Syria Civilian Protection Act signed in 2020 by the United States President Donald Trump. He said the illegal seizure of Syrian assets in foreign banks at the request of Washington is a total robbery. The Caesar Act contains the toughest sanctions ever against Syrian president in a bid to force him back to the country's war. Millions of people depend on the humanitarian aid funneled from a single border crossing between Turkey and northwest Syria. It's now time for a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. The two-time U.S. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld has died at the age of 88. He was widely considered the main architect of the Iraq War. Rumsfeld's family made the announcement in a statement. He served under President George W. Bush as a key proponent of the so-called War on Terror after the 9/11 attacks. Rumsfeld played a leading role in making the case to the world for Iraq's March 2003 invasion. He warned of the dangers of Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, but no such weapons were ever discovered. In the United States, the death toll from a residential building collapse near Miami has risen to 18. 6 more bodies, including 2 children, were found overnight in the shattered ruins of the tower. The mayor of Miami-Dade County, Daniela Levine Cava, said 147 people are still unaccounted for. Cava added that she would convene a grand jury to examine building safety. Nobody has been pulled alive from the debris since the condo came down on the 24th of June. Officials say they still hope to find survivors.
I've been a trauma surgeon for around 11 years, and this has been emotionally the most difficult thing I ever had to endure. I think a lot of us, including myself, a lot of our task force members who I work with are separated from these missing people by only 1 or 2 degrees.
In Sudan, hundreds took to the streets to demand the traditional government's resignation over economic reforms. The reforms, backed by the International Monetary Fund, slant subsidies on petrol and diesel, more than doubling their price. Protesters amassed outside the presidential palace in Khartoum and rejected the IMF-led policies. Earlier, the IMF approved a $2.5 billion loan and debt relief deal with Sudan. Meanwhile, Sudanese authorities said they arrested around 200 members of the former ruling party. Officials accused them of plotting acts of destruction. Kuwait has launched its first indigenously built air artificial Earth satellite into space. In a statement, the orbital space company chief said that the satellite weighs 1 kilogram with a volume of 10 cubic centimeters. He said the Qamar Al-Kuwait is considered as an educational satellite with micro or nanometric dimensions. The chief added that the launch was carried out on a Falcon 9 vehicle from the site at Cape Canaveral. The orbital space company said that the Arab world's first nanosatellites launch company. A prototype of a flying car completed its first intercity flight between the two Slovak airports.
The air car took off from Nitra Airport in western Slovakia and landed 35 minutes later in the capital, Bratislava. The prototype can transform itself from a road vehicle to a plane in 3 minutes by extending its foldable wings and retractable tail. Clean Vision, the company that developed the prototype, said it was the car's 142-second successful landing. The company said that Aircar has completed over 40 hours of test flights so far. The car has flown at 2,500 meters and reached a maximum cruising speed of 190 kilometers per hour. Aircar's second prototype is expected to reach a cruise speed of 300 kilometers.
The United Kingdom is introducing new regulations to help defend its steel industry. This follows a recommendation from the newly established Trade Remedies Authority to scrap some quotas on imports. Trade Minister Liz Truss says London only had the option of accepting or rejecting the recommendation in full. She said quotas and tariffs will be retained for 10 categories of steel for 3 years and revoked in 9 others. But Truss said imports outside the quotas will face a tariff of 25%. The European Union introduced quotas in 2019 when Britain was still in the bloc. It said that it was a bid to guard against the steel shipments normally destined for the United States being redirected to Europe. European markets have advanced as investors anticipate the continent's economic recovery. London's FTSE is leading the gains, rising over 1%. Italy's FTSE MIB and Frankfurt's DAX have also added close to 1%. The CAC 40 in Paris and the Pan-European Stock 600 have gained over 0.5% as well. Earlier, Asian markets fell after a private survey showed that Chinese factory activity growth slowed in June. It's now time to take a look at the weather updates from around the world. For the latest news updates, you can follow us on our social media at indus.news.